welcome to this session in Innovation 2023, looking at innovation in the future of work. My name is Richard Johnson and I'm the Executive Editor of Global Government Forum, if you haven't already seen me today. And we've got a great panel here to discuss this very topical issue. I think one of the lasting legacies for government from the coronavirus pandemic has been the move to a more hybrid form of working across the public sector, following the near overnight switch to working from home at the onset of COVID-19. Many public sector organisations have found benefits in allowing staff to work from home and have now developed hybrid approaches to where officials work. Some governments have also begun to alter recruitment and workplace practices to make the most of these new normal, as it were, the new normal. So we're going to share some expertise from this panel about the future of work and what it might mean for government organisations and how they can innovate, both to introduce new approaches and to make the most of them. And thank you very much to our knowledge partner, KPMG, for supporting this session. We will also have time for questions at the end, so please do think of them. Let me introduce our panel then, and we will hear some opening thoughts from each of them. At the far side, we're joined by Peter van den Brunne, the General Advisor in the Directorate General of Recruitment and Development for the Federal Public Service for Policy and Support in Belgium. Hello, Peter. Next to Peter, we've got Margot Conrad, the Executive Director and Chief of the Human Capital Officers Council and Senior Advisor to the Director of the Office for Public Management in the United States of America. Hello, Margot. Next to Margot, we have Stefan Derry, the Assistant Deputy Minister for Real Property Services, in the Real Property Services branch in Public Services and Procurement Canada. Hello, Stefan. We also are joined by Louise Scott-Worrell, from Government Managed Learning from KPMG in the UK. Hello, Louise. And then we are joined by Stephen Boyd, the Chief Executive Officer of the Government Property Agency. And next to Stephen and next to me is Andrew Goodman, the Director of Workplace Transformation in the Department for Work and Pensions in the UK as well. So as I said, we're going to have some brief opening thoughts from our panel. I'm going to ask Peter to share his.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon to all of you. I'm Peter from Belgium. I work at the Federal Public Service Policy and Support. We basically support all the different federal ministries. Now, I'd like to tell you about the new way of working we've introduced at the Belgian Federal Civil Service. With the new way of working, we refer to not only working remotely from home, telework, which is something which we introduced about 18 years ago, but we've moved on to introduce flex work, have open office spaces, basically work from flex offices or satellite offices, and we have introduced a system where basically civil servants, federal civil servants, can work anytime, anywhere, from any kind of different context. The future was already there before COVID arrived, luckily, because we were prepared. Most of the ministries were. Of course, in order to introduce this, we had to focus on processes, we had to focus on the material environment, and we had to focus on the people. And this is a very important thing, this third factor. Processes, yes, we completely revised the existing work rules that told you that you had to be in the office a certain time, or that even you had to work between 9:30 and 12 or 2 and 4. We completely abolished this. If you want to play with your children on Wednesday afternoon, that's fine. If you want to go to the dentist at 3 p.m., that's fine. There's no need anymore to send in administrative little papers from the doctor or whatever, but your objectives have to be met. And in total, the job needs to be done. Apart from this, we invested in a new material environment, because if you keep introducing flex work, mobility, whatever, and you have the old-fashioned offices, this is not considered to be an attractive employer. Just a couple of pictures how our office spaces look like. And the third thing, I mentioned this already, the people. Impact on the management, of course, because you can't introduce the new way of working and can continue with the old way of managing your team. So we introduced a new way of leading. We instructed our managers. We provided courses for them. We had other systems in place to make sure that they went along with the innovation. And the results of introducing this new way of working in the Belgian federal administration is that we became a very attractive employer. Young graduate students having master's degrees, they mentioned the federal civil service as one of their preferential employers. Last note, it is important to connect. I guess we'll hear some more about this later on in the panel. Yes, it means that we are all having access to all our servers from anywhere in the world. But also importantly, and we can discuss about this later on, is that we have the right to disconnect. Because introducing flex work and introducing lots of innovation in the workforce does not always lead to lesser burnouts. Burnout figures have been on the rise, even in Belgium. So we have now new legislation in place for the civil service that gives civil servants the right to disconnect. That's an important thing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. That's really interesting. I think the kind of fully embedded elements of flexibility there that you discussed, I'm sure many public servants in the room would be keen to find more information about them and get more information. And indeed, the right to disconnect, I know there's similar campaigns in other public services, including, I think, in the UK. And we did cover that right to disconnect in Global Government Forum, a very interesting innovation. Next, we'll ask Margot for her opening reflections.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me today. This has been a terrific event. I wanted to take a quick step back and just share the overall context here of how we're thinking about the future of work in the United States, because it's related to workplace flexibilities, but that's only one part of it. So to take a step back, the President issued his management agenda back in 2021, and that is really the blueprint for government management and operations for the federal government. And we call it the PMA, the President's Management Agenda. Workforce is a huge piece of that, and one of the big strategies is around future of work. And we're thinking about it as the intersection of people, space, and technology. I work for the Office of Personnel Management, so people is the area that I focus on. And we just recently issued a vision for the future of the workforce. We envision the future workforce that is inclusive, agile, and engaged with the right skills to enable mission delivery. And I'll just underscore that the mission delivery piece is the most critical. So, digging in a little bit, that agile and engaged is workforce flexibilities, which is what we're talking about today. And I'll just mention that, as my colleague here indicated earlier, workplace flexibilities were around for a long time before the pandemic, but certainly were accelerated as a result. I think it's important, I'm curious what my colleagues have to say, but in the US, about 50% of the workforce still came to the office every day during the pandemic. So we have a lot of workers that were on site physically. So we certainly want to always remember that part of the population too. And think about when we transition to a hybrid work environment that we're in today, there still were folks that were in every day. As we've transitioned to this hybrid work environment, we've had a few key guiding principles in place. One is promoting flexibility and agility for the workforce, empowering individual agencies to make their own decisions based on their unique agency missions that they are delivering on, strengthening diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, and also considering our communities where we live and where we work and how they are impacted. So we've done a lot of learning, and a few things that I think stand out right now for me is early research is showing us that we can reach more diverse talent when we post these remote positions, diverse in all senses of the word, whether it's geographically, racially, gender, et cetera. Employee engagement has actually, it went up in the beginning of the pandemic, and so I don't think that's 100% because of workplace flexibilities, but it is certainly part of the equation. But I think this is a careful balancing act that we're trying to navigate in all of our countries as we think about the benefits of being in person, the ability to connect, and the innovation and collaboration that can take place more face-to-face. So in closing, I'll just say that the two big areas of focus for us really are on data and thinking about organizational health and productivity within the workforce and how agencies can be better measuring these things. And then in my agency, thinking about how we can equip the workforce through training to really help supervisors and managers navigate in this hybrid work environment.
Thank you, Margot. I think that's a really interesting point. I love kind of mission-based thinking in government. I think that's a really interesting area for kind of further development in terms of how governments structure themselves and think about the public services they deliver. And the point you make about 50% of federal officials still coming into the office at the peak of the pandemic is very well taken. I think we often speak of the future of work, and I did it in my introduction, I'm guilty of it, as kind of something that applies to people flexible working, but what does it mean for those who have to be at their desk, who have to be on the front line, and how can they not be left behind is a very interesting point, and perhaps something we will touch on in the questions. We'll come next to Stefan.
Thank you, Richard. Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me today. What I would say, I'm happy to be on a panel with lots of colleagues. Just to give you a little bit of background, like my colleague Margot did, in Canada, we have started to implement a hybrid model pre-pandemic. We had telework agreement, people were teleworking, but we didn't see it at the full scale as it take with the pandemic. At the pandemic, contrary to the US, I would say that about 85% of our employees, 300,000 across the country, went, and most of them worked from home 2, 3, 4, 5 days a week during the pandemic. So we had 15, 20% continuing to be in the office and working in the office because their job required them to be in the office. So people adapted that during those 3 years, people adapted that way of working. So they were more remote by default because of the pandemic. But in December 15, as we were seeing people coming back in the office, but not necessarily at the scale that they were really continuing to work remotely, a Treasury Board, the employer, put a directive in place that says we're now adopting hybrid by design, which means that for every civil servant, most civil servants will be required to be in the office 2 to 3 days a week. What does that mean for us? From my perspective, I'm responsible for the real estate portfolio of the Government of Canada, about 75 million square feet of space across the country, from coast to coast to coast. And Canada has it's really nice to have 36 million people, 37, maybe 38, but spread across a fairly large country. And in some area, we don't have that many people, right? So how do you make representation of government in those remote areas? So we started before the pandemic, we started implementing hybrid workplace, but it was not necessarily something that people were tending to. They were mainly bringing to the office, half of the civil servants are located in the capital, in the National Capital Region, so about 150,000. When the pandemic started, the shift, and people started to hire people in remote locations, diversity, representation, this was fantastic. And I heard on a panel this morning on how this would influence policy making, because now you have diversity and you have representation from across the country. And now I feel that after the pandemic, you know, we call this the three-legged stool. HR, technology, and real property have never worked together more than they did starting at the pandemic. This is our three-legged stool, and we need to work together if we want to face the future of work, and we want to equip our people to work in the future with all the technology that they need, working from almost anywhere. And also we need to equip our offices to be able to, when they come to the office should be a magnet. They come and see, they come there to collaborate, they come to meet people. We'll still need offices in the future, probably a lot less, and we shouldn't we shouldn't lose that efficiency, that potentially reducing our footprint, equipping our footprint with really civil servants deserve the best space possible. In Canada, we have about $2 billion of deferred maintenance in a large portfolio. This is the opportunity to take that portfolio, keep the best asset, make it the space a magnet, renovate it, and really make it a place, a hub where people can come and work. And the vision is really to distribute that hub across the country. Smaller, instead of having Health Canada building, tax building, we have Government of Canada building across the country in smaller center where you're a federal employee, you can come and work. You want the top technology, secret access to our network, you can come and work in those spaces. So really leveraging the pandemic or the result of the hybrid workforce and the hybrid workplace to advance our portfolio and to advance, really be able to convert our portfolio to be a tool to attract and retain talent from coast to coast to coast. Looking forward to the discussion today. Thank you.
Thanks, Stefan. I think that phrase, hybrid by design, is really important because a lot of public servants were remote by necessity, but not by design. They didn't have the time to think about it when it all started at the start of the coronavirus pandemic. So taking some time to think about the design is a key point. And I love the example from Canada that it's broadening the recruitment net, allowing you to recruit from more places, which, given the recruitment challenges that we know many public services face, I think that's a real opportunity for some great synergies in this agenda. Again, something we'd love to pick up in the questions if anybody has any questions on kind of recruitment issues. Louise, ask you for your opening thoughts.
Thank you. Delighted to be here this afternoon. I'm just going to take a step back very slightly and just talk about some fundamental elements that we've found at KPMG are really important, both to hybrid and flexible working, but also really important to future of the workforce. So there are 5 things that are really important. The first one is organisational design. The next one is employee experience. Then it's the talent marketplace, not forgetting strategic workforce planning, and then talent and skills. Just to give you a high-level overview of some of those and why they're important. So organisational design, what size is your government, what size is your department, what span of control do you have, what capability and skill set are you aspiring to? Do you have a skills taxonomy? Is it related to job roles, and do you have a joined-up job architecture? Thinking about employee experience and employee value proposition, this is really at the heart of business performance. Research suggests that employees who feel that their voice is listened to are empowered 5 times to perform better at their job. I'll just let that sink in terms of a productivity gain, just by having their voice listened to. It's really important your employees know what you stand for and that you listen to those messages and if they're being heard. When was the last time you did an employee listening exercise? Do you know whether that's resonating? Really importantly, in hybrid working, do your employees feel cared for? Do they know, and do you have a strategy to look after their well-being? In terms of their talent marketplace, what is your strategy for sourcing your talent? Are you using AI to recruit or resource any of your projects or roles? That has 2 benefits. The first benefit is it delivers a business improvement and business performance, but it also has a people element as the AI reduces the bias, so it reduces the chance of people feeling disgruntled because they've been overlooked. Thinking about strategic workforce planning, at its essence, it's having the right people in the right place with the right skills. Hybrid working has really made that even more important. It's even more important that you listen to some of those management demand signals and that you're reviewing your strategic workforce planning on a quarterly basis. And you're thinking about short-term, medium, and the future talent. Does your strategic workforce planning have the ability to think of skills and tasks and not people and roles? And then finally, on talent and skills, How are your people functions supporting you to recruit, retrain, and succession plan your talent? It's really important to have proactive performance management, and it's really important, again, that people feel very much at the heart of your organisation in terms of kind of, the people first and the estate comes second in terms of delivering a future skilled workforce.
Great, Louise, thanks very much. Great checklist there of issues for organisations to take on board, particularly tie in with artificial intelligence, which we mentioned on this stage earlier today. It is going to revolutionise public servants and probably going to touch areas that wouldn't at kind of first blush you'd think be affected by it, but it's definitely something that public service organisations are going to have to take on board. Stephen, I'll ask you for your opening remarks.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to have a conversation with you this afternoon. I'm Stephen Boyd. I'm the Chief Executive of the Government Property Agency, which is the UK agency that looks after central government offices. We manage about 40% of those offices directly, which 240 buildings represents about 100,000 people. But we also provide strategic planning and oversight of the whole portfolio, which is around about 500 buildings, 300,000 civil servants, and about 2 million square metres of commercial office space. I thought I would share with you some of my challenges, because the challenges are also opportunities. So the first challenge for us in the GPA is integrating a previously fragmented estate, bringing together civil servants in a place, wherever we can, into high-quality, digitally connected hubs, rather like Stefan was describing earlier. Secondly, we're doing our bit to respond to the climate crisis, making sure our buildings are as sustainable as possible. And that's not purely an altruistic thing, it's also a utility cost-saving thing, and also an attraction and retention thing, because young people want to join organisations that take the climate crisis seriously. Thirdly, we're supporting the UK's Places for Growth initiative, which is reducing the size of the civil service and therefore the size of the estate in central London, and creating great places to work for civil servants in every nation and region of the UK. Our fourth challenge is responding to the changed ways of working that have come about as a result of the pandemic. There was hybrid working before, but now we see much more of it. And what does that mean for our office designs? There are certainly some things that can be done better at home than can be done in the office. But the office is better for many things. And we describe that with 4 C's: community, collaboration, creativity, and caring. Our fifth challenge is providing consistent property technology within buildings to support productivity. Several colleagues have spoken about a 3-legged stool: people, buildings and technology. And people is definitely the most important of those. It mustn't be the longest leg, otherwise the stool would be rather wobbly. But people is definitely the most important. And GPA benefits from having both the property and the property technology within the same organisation. And that means we can plan for those things in an integrated and effective way. And the last challenge I thought I'd share with you is trying to innovate such that government property is not seen as an overhead, but it's seen as a catalyst to add value and help government departments deliver their outcomes.
Great, thanks, Stephen. And that last point's a very good one. For a conference like this, you know, we've got all these sessions that are about how not just areas of government themselves can innovate, but how they can catalyse innovation in other areas. And I think that's kind of key to the theme of today and the theme of this session. And lastly, in these opening remarks, I'll ask Andrew.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. So I'm Andrew Goodman, the Director of Workplace Transformation. So I joined DWP in April 2020, which was an interesting time because it was right in the middle of lockdown. And obviously the job I joined to do as Workplace Transformation changed quite dramatically in about the 3 months between accepting the job and actually joining it. But the remit's still very much the same: to make a smaller, better, greener estate and deliver that. But for our department, before the pandemic, we had too much space, and almost 80% was delivered into the workplace. And for those who aren't aware, the Department of Work and Pensions is responsible for sort of virtually cradle to grave. We do child maintenance group. We deliver universal credit, which Alex talked about earlier this morning, and we also deliver pensions as well. So we impact a lot of people, and during the pandemic, it was really important that we delivered the services, and you heard from Alex again, it was one of the examples of the innovation of universal credit. But during the pandemic, we shifted to 80% home working, and that was a paradigm shift for us. And it also took a lot of expertise in terms of the technology. We were very much PC related into laptops and getting us into the mobile technology. But that 20%, the majority of that was in our job centre site, so where our work coaches were there delivering that service frontline all the way through the pandemic. And that picks up the point you heard earlier about actually there are different work people, different work backgrounds, which mean you have to work differently. Post-pandemic, our job centres are very much still face-to-face. Our service centres, both telephony and digital, and our corporates are about 40%. But we still have too much space. We've got about 150,000 spaces for 90,000 people. So part of the job is still to make it smaller and better. We were very fortunate during the period to also go through the Smarter Working programme, which is one of Stephen's programmes about to deliver a smarter working agenda. And we successfully achieved the PAS 3000 Smarter Working Accreditation's mature status, one of the first major departments to do that. And that's helped us on the journey. It's lots of very good information, lots of very good thoughts, and making sure your policies are up to date and making it drive forward. So just finally, just looking ahead, one thing we have learned very much is that it's not one size fits all. We think there are a number of variables, whether you work in those front of house roles, whether you work in the service centres, whether you work in digital, whether you work in policy, that can be very different. We've also identified that demographics change that, and actually some people do not want to work from home. It's their own personal circumstances at home affect that, and also the location. Some people do not feel safe working at home with the technology that we provide, and actually understanding that and giving the right environment for everybody to work. We do look at our staff in 4 ways, either office-based, hybrid, mobile or home worker, but as an organisation we are not a home working organisation. We have a number of people for reasonable adjustments, we do that, it's all about being inclusive, but we are not moving to that space. So overall, what we're trying to do is to develop a really great place to work. But what we also want to do is make sure that's because it's a magnet, not a mandation, and I think that's one of the phrases that Stephen's team use quite a lot, but it's very important to us that we're not trying to mandate it, we're trying to make sure people want to come into the office for the value that it brings.
Thanks very much. I think that came across in a number of the presentations today. I heard that phrase from one of Stephen's colleagues at the GPA, magnet, not a mandate, a year ago or so, and I think that encapsulates the crux of this agenda. You want people to be in the office to do the collaborative things that the office is best for, and by extension then deliver the best public services. I think that really encapsulates the issue. We are going to take some questions now from the floor. So if anyone can raise their hand if they would like to ask something. Anybody got any questions? Oh, question at the back there. I'll take these in batches of a couple, and then I'll put them to our panel.
Yeah, thank you very much. Calvin Jones, Cardiff University and Welsh Government. So, apologies for the echo. We too in Welsh Government are going through the reduction and streamlining process. So I wonder if anybody in the panel is involved in any place-based approaches to make sure that the places that formerly had larger government sites aren't negatively affected by those streamlining opportunities, which look at opportunities on our side that may leave empty buildings. And the second question, if I may, whilst Wales is the centre for most things, it's not the centre for wages and for a hub of public sector delivery. So hybrid working leaves small and rural councils particularly in a position where their staff are increasingly poached by larger, better paying organisations, often public sector organisations, so English authorities are poaching Welsh staff. So how do we make sure that we can continue for smaller regional organisations to make sure that the hybrid working and home working drive doesn't leave them particularly exposed to lack of quality staff? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone just behind there? Is there another question down here? There we go. Sorry.
Hi, Beth from Ofwat, the water regulators. Stephen and the GPA created a network of smarter working practitioners that allowed us to collaborate across all the different departments. How can we ensure that we do that across governments, like we're learning from today? And how can we continue post the Smarter Working programme to collaborate, to share training, share information, so we're not all creating content from scratch?
Thank you very much. I'll let Stephen answer that first one about the smart working practitioners and how you create a network across government, because I'm sure it's something that the GP is working very hard on.
Thank you for the question. Delighted to speak about the Smarter Working programme, which has been a great success. It's been helping all UK government departments to prepare for smarter working, prepare for hybrid working. We started on it in 2018, and so we're well placed when the pandemic came along, and not just about places, the work design of workplaces and the technology, but also about leadership and behaviours. And the group of people that we've been able to work with across government has been fabulous. Champions and practitioners in every government department, they've done the assessment of their sort of adjacent departments. We haven't done the assessment. We've trained them and let them go out there. That programme comes to an end at the end of this month, actually, having largely succeeded on what it was intended to do. But it's been so popular that we're not going to stop in being involved in smarter working. We're going to keep those groups of practitioners meeting, are going to keep them sharing ideas. We've got, in fact, our Smarter Working Awards on Thursday this week in Manchester, which I'm looking forward to seeing all the great work there. And we're seeing a bit of a transition in the way that our new offices are working, in that we've changed the way that we are inducting people to those buildings. We used to carry out induction for individuals, for every individual, and we've discovered that it actually works better to induct a small number of champions and then have those people support their own staff. And where we're getting the biggest bang for the buck is where those champions are also the smarter working practitioners, and that's working really, really well, and we've just had fantastic success with that in Peterborough, a new building that opened just a month ago.
Great, thanks very much. Margaret?
I wanted to I heard part of the question, but I know some of it was directed at you specifically, but this notion of collaboration across government, I wanted to share one quick model from the US, which I'm the executive director of what's called the Chief Human Capital Officers Council, and it's basically the senior executive HR leaders from all across the federal government, and we convene regularly. And I think one of the success stories we've had is this body, my agency, the Office of Personnel Management, has been partnering with them to actually help inform and shape all of these workforce policies that we're rolling out. And they're instrumental on the back end around implementation and sharing best practices and challenges with each other. And there are similar councils all across government. There's the Chief Information Officers Council and the Chief Data Officers Council. So to the extent we do this, and we can do even more of it, is bringing these executive bodies together to do that problem solving and that identification of best practices. So I just wanted to share that as something that I think has been working well, and I know we value that input because every agency is so different and is experiencing things a little bit differently, and we want to make sure that any government-wide policy is informed by those individuals that have to actually execute on it, right?
Yeah. Do you want to come in there, Steph?
Thank you, and I would add that in addition to the HR, which I'm member of, our Council of HR, Head of HR, there's a Council of Head of Real Property where we share also best practices. In addition to that, just, you know, like, we don't walk in this alone, and we want a collaboration that goes beyond border. Stephen and I are both on the Workplace Network, TWN, with the United States, our colleague around the world. We're trying to learn from each other and benefit from, you know, you know, whatever I did and failed. Maybe the UK doesn't have to do it, and vice versa, and Australia doesn't have to do it. So we're really working, since the pandemic, I feel, working collaboratively, not only within Government of Canada, but even with our colleagues around the world, basically of, you know, this is the first time we had a pandemic that size and that impacted all of these people. So for us, what the workplace will look in the future and how we're going to use it is extremely important. So as we go navigate through uncharted territory, it's important to say, okay, that's how Stephen and they're doing it in the UK, that's how they're doing it in the US. So sharing our best practices also is another level than collaboration inside the government. I think it's also important. We lived that pandemic together, relying on other countries to do vaccine and all of this. So we can work towards adopting a hybrid model together also.
And if I can put an element of the first question to you, Peter, if I can summarise it slightly, that it's not just public sector organisations that have moved towards hybrid working, it's all organisations in many sectors of the economy. So our colleague was saying that, you know, in Welsh local government, some staff are being poached because they don't have to move house anymore to work in a new job. You were very interesting in your opening remarks about the extent to which Belgium has embraced this. Where would you say the net impact is? Is this a net positive for recruitment and retention, or because other organisations are doing it, is it a net negative? Where does the balance lie?
The fact that we introduced the new way of working quite early on had a huge impact on the image, and we usually we talk about the kind of recruitment processes we launch. We talk about the image that we portray, and we analyze data in terms of number of freshly graduate students from university, for instance, applying for a job in the civil service, what they think of the civil service, and so on. Basically, employer branding. What we see, and I think this is what you see worldwide, is that for the young, talented people who join not only the civil service but also the private sector, for them there are new mechanisms that motivate them. We can't lure them to the public sector anymore by telling them, look, you're going to have a nice pension. They say, well, you know, that's so long from now, that's not a reason to join the civil service. And I would tell them, well, look, you know, you're going to work in Brussels and you have a fine office where you can put things on your desk and say, I mean, this is old-fashioned. We see in the world around us that we can work from home, that work-life balance is important. So people that join the civil service, they're looking for added value. And in the session just before here, I don't know if anyone of you witnessed that, a colleague from Singapore explained what motivates people, you know, the purpose, knowing what you're doing your job for. We get quite a lot of people that say, I want to serve the public. I don't want to work to make shareholders happy. I only live once, I want to serve the public. But at the meantime, I need the competence and I need the new digital skills to make sure that I'm ready to face all the challenges in the digital skills field. And then the third component that my colleague from Singapore also mentioned was the autonomy. And that's one of the biggest positive consequences we see in the new way of working, because you need to increase autonomy. I mentioned it earlier, you can't manage the old-fashioned way, and in the beginning when we introduced this, and even now sometimes, some managers react like, hang on, you want us to introduce the new way of working and flex work and so on, and you permit that people spend time with their children in the afternoon, and then they do the work on their targets in the evening and so on, but how can I check? And this is why we've taken some drastic measures over the last couple of years. First of all, in accompanying our managers, in telling them how important it is to lead by objectives. Now, this has been translated throughout our HR approach. We have a completely new appraisal system, which is not a bureaucracy anymore, but which is based on feedback, objectives given feedback. And the ultimate, how shall I say, milestone we did years ago was get rid of the top 3 levels of management based on hierarchy. Because in the past, in the Belgian civil service, you became a director or director general if you'd been the longest in service and you made a promotion. And we said, well, this blocks innovation, this blocks management by objectives, because some of them are not ready for this. And this is why we said, from now on in the federal civil service, top 3 management positions have a mandate system. And only 6 years, yearly evaluation, and people from inside the public service, but also from the private service, can post for a managerial position. So there's a whole system around it. But to get back to your original question, yes, we see now that young people, talented people, in some cases choose the civil service, the civil public sector service instead of private sector companies, because they see we offer rather similar things. They have some people who visit our offices feel like, wow, even in a private sector company, sometimes you don't feel this. So it's not only a give and take, it's the full picture that plays a role.
And Louise, I'll just come to you on that as well, because the questions you set out in your opening remarks, it's not only public sector organisations that will be asking themselves those. Do you think public sector organisations have a good story to tell in the future of work, or is it as kind of competitive as it ever would be?
Yeah, absolutely. As I said before, don't underestimate the power that you have in terms of that engagement and the whole employee experience. I think it's really important to think about it from that employee point of view, and to think about things like, what are the moments that matter? We were talking about onboarding, induction, so that's a really important moment that matters. If you get it wrong, it's really hard to row back from there. So what are the other things, you know, when people want to take holiday? How do they book their holiday? How do they engage with their line manager? I mentioned about span of control. Do they know their line manager? Are they actively performance managed? The reality is most people don't leave because of money. They leave because there's something else that's made them look, made them kind of be curious. If they like their manager, if they like the work that they do, then they're really motivated. And the purpose that you can kind of share with your employees in terms of the great work that public sector do is really important. We do a CEO survey. We ran it a couple of times over the last few years, and purpose is the number one thing on corporate CEOs' agendas in terms of how do they communicate that to their employees. Well, you know, civil servants, public sector, you have that. You obviously can't overwork it, but actually I think it's something that is really important to make sure. And then the other point that Stephen was making around ESG, you know, talent, they are looking at different indicators. They are looking at how you treat the planet. They're looking about your sustainability and your governance policies as well. So you really need to think through the whole employee life cycle.
And Andrew, just to put the final point from that round of questions to you, it was about kind of the place-based thinking of the future of work, and how if offices are relocating, or if bigger offices are being broken into smaller offices, the kind of impact on local economies of that. An organisation the size of the estate of the DWP will have quite an impact, I imagine, on some local economies. How big a factor is that, those kind of secondary impacts that you have to think of when you're thinking about the future of your organisation?
Thank you. I think it is a challenge. It is one thing that we are looking at all the time. We have a national network, but as I said, we have too much space, and that space is underutilised, and therefore it's not good for sustainability, it's not good for cost effectiveness or value for money. So the places for growth that Stephen was talking about earlier, you know, we're already a long way down that road. We already have a big footprint. But we've also identified that we've got to provide opportunities for our colleagues to have career progression and make sure that we have our resilience in places. So we are looking at sort of minimum sizes of sites. We are looking very carefully at when we shut a site, all the factors that involves. You know, what is the impact on the local economy? What else can we do? And what we are definitely not looking at is using this as a reduction in staff numbers. We are looking at it to how do we retrain, redeploy our staff, and we've been very successful in our last set of closures to minimise that impact. It will have an impact, but we are obviously trying to balance that efficiency, but still maintain that national footprint, and we believe that national footprint is vital for DWP going forward.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And thank you, everyone on this panel, for taking part in this session. I'm going to have to draw it to a close there. It's absolutely flown by, but we're getting the big red number on the screen that we can see telling us that our time is up. So sorry I couldn't take more questions, but I think that was an absolutely fantastic session with some really good discussion and some really good kind of key learning points from governments around the world that I hope you found as useful and interesting as I did. And thank you again to our knowledge partner KPMG for supporting this session.